All right, we are back for part two of the saga, right? That's continuing, and for those of you that might have missed part one, you should stop right now and you should go back to part one and listen to that to get yourself caught up. For those of you that listened to part one already, good for you. We're happy to have you back here for part two, and so we're gonna jump back into that conversation with Roger Thurow, and really, once again, let's bring you up to speed. We talked about those four pillars, talked about a couple of those vocab terms, food security and a calorie, just to give you a little bit of that background on talking about food security and be able to have those conversations. And Roger's going to keep on going and leading us down that path. Thomas, do you have anything else to add before we get in back with Roger again?
As we're listening to the second part, just keep in mind of ways that you could take this and apply it to wherever you're at in life, whether or not you're a student or an educator listening to this. We all have unique ways that we can make an impact and help fight the battle against food insecurity. And Mr. Roger Thurow does an excellent job in this second part of showcasing how we can meet these challenges exactly where we're at and meet them head on.
Absolutely. All right, ladies and gentlemen, enjoy.
Accompanied by their parents. One parent, maybe both of them, were there, sometimes multiple children from the same family. We parted the flaps of one of the tents and walked inside, and it was just this scene of utter horror. And I was speechless, and it really struck me what the WFP official had told me, and I was ashamed of myself when he was saying that, because I hadn't, of all my time of foreign corresponding in so many years in Africa, I had never really focused on hunger or looked into the eyes of the hungry. I had written about hunger and malnutrition as kind of pieces of larger stories on the economics of Africa or a particular country, or on hunger, malnutrition as a cause of instability, the impact of conflict. But this is the first time then that I was really then looking into the eyes of someone dying of hunger. And eventually I didn't know who to talk to, so I'm just walking around trying to absorb all this, and then finally came to a little boy who was on a mat on the ground of the tent. He was propped up between the legs of his father, Tesfaye. The little boy's name was Hargirso. And I began talking to Tesfaye, the father. And he said Hargirso, his little boy, was about 5 years old. He was the youngest or the most vulnerable in the family when the famine hit. When he carried him to the emergency feeding tent, he only weighed about 27 pounds at 5 years old. Tesfaye himself was also so thin you could see kind of his rib cage, his collarbones were very evident. So he was just skin and bones. And it was those eyes, Tesfaye and the son Hargirso, they're the ones that I first looked into. It did become a disease in my soul, because what Tesfaye was asking, there was this sense of guilt that he had, that what have I done to my child? What have I done to my son? I didn't know how to respond at first, but the more I thought about it and looked around the tent, I was then thinking to myself, well, that's the wrong question. It's not what have you done to your son, but what have we, a collective we in the world, done to your son, to all these children, that in 2003, this problem is still with us and continues to abide. That then becomes, in essence, it was right, it becomes a disease of the soul. As a foreign correspondent, I would normally leave the tent, write my story, move on to the next one. Well, where's the next story? Maybe not even in Ethiopia during the famine, but some other story in Africa or elsewhere in the developing world that I was writing about at the time with the journal. That story stopped me cold. Hunger in the 21st century. I knew that's the story I have to keep coming back to and coming back to and coming back to. And that, in essence, is what brings me to your doorstep and to your podcast today, because I have indeed continued to do that, continue to write about it at the Wall Street Journal. And then did the first book, as Thomas was mentioning, Enough, Why the World's Poor, Starve in an Age of Plenty, with my Wall Street Journal colleague at the time, Scott Kilman. A lot of the reporting and anecdotes and stories from Ethiopia were part of that book. It was right after the global food crisis in 2007, 2008, with rising prices, shortages of the staple of main crops around the world, food riots in dozens of countries. My goodness, what's happening to our supply chain? and food security in the world. So that book comes out in 2009. And I realized this is what I really want to continue to write about solely, full-time with my writing. So I figured it was time then to leave the Wall Street Journal. And my diseased soul then propelling me to the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. I was back from travel all over the world, almost back home. I'm from Northern Illinois, to the Chicago Bureau of the Wall Street Journal, writing about hunger and poverty issues in the United States. While we were writing the book, then we're kind of coordinating some aspects with the Chicago Council on Global Affairs, which was beginning its own major pillar of work on global food security and the importance of American leadership in agriculture development as a way to end hunger and malnutrition, this traditional role that America has always had. So then left the journal to then become a senior fellow at the Chicago Council, where then I could full-time write about these issues. The second book then, The Last Hunger Season, where I focused on 4 smallholder farmers in Western Kenya and what their lives were like. And then the book after that, on the first 1,000 days that Thomas mentioned, the period from the beginning of a mom's pregnancy to the second birthday of the child, which is about 1,000 days, and the importance of nutrition in that for the development of the children and for society as a whole. But that tent, Tesfaye and Hargirso, remained with me. Whatever happened to them? So I've had the great fortune then of being able to return to them several times over the years. They didn't know if Hargirso was going to survive because the shock had been so great. So when I left the tent that day, it was like in 2003, well, has he survived? That question kept wearing at me and eating at this diseased soul of mine. And it was then it was 5 years later in 2008 when then doing the reporting for the book, was back in Ethiopia, went back, revisited Hargir. So hooray, he survived. But you could see that the toll from that malnutrition had resulted in stunting, both physically and cognitively. He wasn't at school. He was very short, came up barely to my waist at the time. He was 10 years old then at the time. Went back again when he was 5 years later. So when he was 15, still, grew a little bit, but not that much. And he was in school, yay, but he was in first grade, just beginning to study the alphabet at 15 years old. And he basically looked like he fit in with all the other kids in the first grade classroom who were maybe 6, 7, or 8 years old. Then went back again this past December. So a year ago from now, when we're doing this recording in early December. So it was December 2019, before COVID began its relentless march. So it's basically the last international trip have made. And was doing some other reporting in Ethiopia, went back and saw Hargirso then. So it's now, so 2019, it's 16 years afterwards. He's now about 21 years old. He's in the 4th grade. And that day he was studying very basic math. Said he was still struggling with the alphabet and with reading and writing. 21 years old or so, 4th grade. There were 60 plus students in that 4th grade classroom. Half of them or so were 18 years old and above. At the time I was thinking, boy, this is a glimpse of the impact of severe malnutrition, not only in the first 1,000 days, but then Hargirso was 5 by then. He'd had a wretched first 1,000 days as well with poor nutrition. And it was like, well, here's the impact as one looks back at that severe shock. Once COVID hit then, so several months later, I'm thinking back on that and beginning to write about it. And I thought, wow, it's not only a look into the past and how that impacts things, it's a glimpse into the future. What about all the children, the babies, the moms, the young children today severely impacted by malnutrition, by hunger from the pandemic? Will we 15 years from now, 16, 20 years from now, be looking in the classrooms of the future, into the 4th grade classrooms, and also be seeing a lot of teenagers there around the world because of the stunting, the physical and the cognitive stunting from them? So it then becomes for me a harbinger of the future that I think it's the malnutrition that will carry the impacts of the pandemic far into the future, beyond the vaccine, beyond the cure. That impact, we don't know what that's going to be. So that's kind of one story of that you see the impact of that, of the severe malnutrition, of hunger, how that manifests itself over time. And then the application then to the United States, one has to think about, well, look at the malnutrition in our country that surely must be happening now because the schools are closed. So the school feeding programs, aren't available. Yes, the schools are doing valiant efforts still to make sure that the children are fed and the communities to deal with food insecurity. But to think of what is the long-term consequences of this, and further the impact for all of us, Americans, no matter where we are in the world, as we see in GLAGjr, 21 years old, a young man, still in the 4th grade, you see that stunting from early childhood malnutrition then becomes this life sentence of underproduction, of underachievement, and how that impacts all of us, because we have to ask ourselves, what might these malnourished children have accomplished for all of us were they not malnourished in their early years, be in the first 1,000 days or in their early childhood years. And then you realize that this lost chance of greatness for one child, say for GLAGjr, so who knows what he might have accomplished for his family, for his community in Ethiopia, for all of us. This lost chance of greatness for one child, then, no matter where they are in the world, becomes this lost chance of greatness for all of us, because who knows what we're losing. That loss, that opportunity cost is just, it's staggering when you think about it. And then when you think that kind of 22% or so, almost 1 in every 4 children in the world today under 5 years old are stunted in some manner from poor nutrition. It's like, what are we doing to ourselves as a world, as a humanity, that we tolerate this malnutrition, this food insecurity, particularly for the youngest of us? And so that's the story that then continues there and is what propels me forward. So that's both the outrage and then the inspire in it. It doesn't have to be that way. We can do something about that. And again, the inspiration of, gee, if we eliminate that, what does that unleash in terms of the potential and accomplishments and achievements for all of us in this world?
And I think, Roger, you bring up a really good point in terms of trying to look at solutions, right? Like trying to look forward and look out. And, I think each one of us has roles, right? So you are bringing a voice to the story and the evidence, right? And you're a way to get that information into more people and have that exponential impact. Thomas and I are involved on the education side, and we're people that are going to be put in positions to facilitate and catalyze students in our classrooms to try to do something about this. But there's people listening to this, and there's also people all across the world that will hear these stories, and they'll be moved, right? Like when you hear the story of that little boy sitting in a tent in Ethiopia, it gets really real quick, and it's a vivid image that sticks in my mind. And I want to do something, but for those people that are sitting there thinking, okay, I've been moved, what's next? What's that next step now to make a difference and be part of the solution instead of being that group that just thinks about it and talks about it? What do we do next?
Yeah, great question. It's one that I ask myself all the time. And as you said, we all have our own roles. I think in one of the vital roles of that for journalists and for teachers is to pass on this information. It's what I call raising the clamor. We can all raise the clamor and say, look, this is the reality of our world with the food insecurity that we have and that is in front of us. How do we abide that? Why do we abide that? Here's the consequences of that. So I think once one raises the clamor of that and makes people aware of it, and again, it's not just happening over there somewhere in Ethiopia or some other far place that we've seen TV images of. The impacts of it really impact all of us. It's this opportunity cost. It's the impact on the global, economy. The World Bank estimates that it might be You know, the total cumulative cost of childhood malnutrition and stunting impacts or costs the world about $3.5 trillion a year in kind of GDP equivalency. Wow. Additional healthcare costs, kind of all the side impacts of childhood stunting and malnutrition, lost education, lack of productivity in the labor force for these children as they grow. You know, it's that raising that clamor and that awareness that it impacts all of us, right? And so that's something that we need to be involved in, that we just can't sit back and say, oh, that's too bad. And the charity efforts are really important, so that helps. But you know, at some stage, then, which everybody can then be involved in, to kind of rise up and say, we need to move from charity to justice on these issues, right? I think it's one of the essential injustices of the world. I think the students particularly understand that and are keen to that. So students in high school, in middle school already, they're seeing what's right and wrong. They're seeing injustices in the world. Well, this isn't right, right? Absolutely. Well, what are we going to do about it? Why do we tolerate this? We don't have to, because it is something that we can do something about, and we know what to do, particularly in this country. You know, we like to think of ourselves as the breadbasket of the world, and in essence we are. But if we look at ourselves, as you say, look over the fence at our neighbors, or the people sitting next to us in our houses of worship, or the ones that we encounter kind of in our daily activities, and the food insecurity in our own country, and then realize, well, how do we tolerate that as the richest country in the world, a democracy that has been admired by so many people around the world, and we have this food insecurity problem in this most abundant country in the world? Kind of what's wrong with that? And not to respond to that solely by the charity is great, but that can't be our only response. What are then the justice issues? What are the economic issues, the issues of our democracy, of our sense of fairness? You know, so it's I think that is something that then everybody can kind of be involved in, to raising the clamor, the moving this from just an issue of charity, you know, which is really good, but that we have to get beyond, oh, here's a problem, let's kind of put a Band-Aid over it and make sure people have enough to get through this time. But let's make sure they don't get into this position to begin with, right? And that shouldn't happen. So how do we do that? So that's a role for everybody, but it's like, yeah, it's raising the clamor, it's spreading the word, spreading the awareness, spreading the stories, and that whole aspect of impact, and above all, that we can do something about it. It doesn't have to be this way.
You know, and Roger, once again, I want to dovetail off of that. You know, I feel like Thomas and I do a pretty good job at keeping that clamor going, right? We're developing these platforms, and we continue to talk about this. And you know, it almost has to be ad nauseum, or else nothing gets done, right? Like, we have to continue that conversation and give it life. For a student out there listening, somebody that might be a 14, 15, 16, 17-year-old, who is sitting there in a chair in a classroom, and they say, okay, I want to raise a clamor. I want to speak up. I want to have a voice. But oftentimes, a lot of those students don't necessarily have faith in what they're saying, and don't have the courage and know where to speak.
Mm-hmm.
What's one piece of advice that you would give a student out there who wants to have a voice, who wants to raise a clamor, to do that in a way that empowers them and makes the most impact?
Yeah, great question again. I think it's you know, as journalists, we're told to, you know, have the greatest impact, write about what you know, right? And it's what teachers would tell their students in writing essays. Well, what do I write about? Write about what you know, or what's, so in this context, it's speak to those around you, speak to your classmates, speak to your family, you know, your parents, your siblings, you know, speak in your church, in your youth groups, or whatever, you know, house of worship or faith that you're part of. But speak in you know, whatever you can in school, and with your classmates and things. Raise it in your classes. The great thing that I've seen about the Teach Ag program and the teachers that I've met, I'm amazed by the great array and variety of kind of disciplines that the teachers come from, and the courses that they teach. So it's not necessarily, only the ag sciences, which is really important because that's kind of the basis and the groundwork for all of this. We need the food, we need the nutrients and the nutritious food. Uh, but then it's also kind of any of the sciences, the chemistry, the biology, humanities, social studies. I remember meeting a rhetoric teacher in Des Moines at one of the gatherings. It was like a rhetoric teacher, well, what do you teach about? Precisely this thing, the social aspects of it, the justice aspects of it. So the humanities teachers, the geography, kind of looking at if you look at the hunger map of the world and just see kind of the inequalities there. And if you look at it county by county in the United States or state by state, breakdowns here. So kind of if you're just teaching that, history teachers, and the history of hunger and why it abides and how it abides. So yeah, the one thing I would say is talk to those closest to you, to those around you, and then see how it kind of mushrooms from there. Hopefully from there you get confidence, as maybe you get a couple of your friends or people in the family or some other relatives who maybe hadn't thought about this before to say, yeah, I think that's really important. And then you become more emboldened and encouraged that I think I'm having an influence on people at least thinking about these issues.
Absolutely. I love that.
Yeah, and I would echo that too. I think that's an excellent thing, and it's an excellent starting point for high school students. And that can even be a way for you to kind of snowball impact, because you start with the people that you're really familiar with, your peers in the classroom, your family. You talk to them, you get them excited too. They go and talk to more people, you get more comfortable talking to additional people, and then it just keeps going and compiling as you continue to raise the clamor. And that inspires a similar question for me. We've been talking a lot about awesome stuff that you've done and that has inspired you to continue raising the clamor. What projects are you currently working on right now to continue raising the clamor and spread awareness of food security issues? And how can students find out more about the projects you're currently working on?
Great, thanks. And some of that is of the work is inspired by you guys and GLAG and your colleagues at Penn State and your all the teachers and residents, or the teachers in waiting, or teachers to become. One, I'm so excited by Thomas, I probably told you this the last time we saw each other, that I always leave these meetings and these conversations more inspired than any kind of inspiration I may leave behind, because it the same as you're talking about. So how does a young person or student start on this? Talk to who's around you. You get encouraged. So I get this encouragement from you all and from the teachers and the students that people are interested in this. They want to hear these stories. They want to know the reality and what they can do about it. So it's like, oh, well, I should keep writing about this, because sometimes I'll think, maybe I should write about something else, right? Am I banging my head against the wall with this? And it's like, no. If you reach one person, well, that's reason enough for writing the story. It makes them think about something. So anyway, I continue with that. So my journalism, or my disease soul, propels me to keep writing about these things. So I'm now so I'm still with the Chicago Council on Global Affairs as a senior fellow. We've started a partnership with Auburn University and the College of Human Sciences, where they have the Hunger Solutions Institute, which was the founding university and still the lead organizer in Universities Fighting World Hunger. Presidents united to solve hunger, the presidents being the university and college presidents and administrators. So to all the students out there and teacher counselors, that when you go off to university or college, no matter kind of what level of post-secondary education, look for joining Universities Fighting World Hunger. If there's not a chapter on campus, well then start one. That's the way to begin. And then they have a hunger studies minor here, and so we're hoping to adapt that curriculum for high schools. And yeah, Thomas, with you and GLAG, I have been talking about this. So the work that you're doing on that will be very instructive and inspiring to us, because what we're hoping with that is then, so the some of the stories that I have, the real people that are in those books and their stories, and in the 3 books, and in the videos and some podcasts that have come out of that, how can we build a curriculum around them so that they then become kind of the major parts of that? Because I figure that as students, if in the curriculum, either in the readings or yeah, just in the regular curriculum, they can be transported to other places, into the lives of other people, where hopefully they'll see themselves, or they will see similar conditions. Carson, as you were saying, well, I'm hearing this about this story over here, but I can relate to that here. Some things that I've seen here. So to be able to do that, and then yeah, a couple times I've talked about hunger in America. Figure, yeah, maybe I should turn my writing attention more to the hunger that's in front of us here in the United States. The Hunger Solutions Institute doing really some groundbreaking research on campus hunger. And even at a university like Auburn, I think they found that maybe like 27% of their students are at one time or another food insecure, mainly on nutritional insecurity. And Auburn's a public institution. It's one of the land grant schools, as is Penn State, so in Alabama. And yeah, that was an eye-opening survey that they had done. They're extending that to other schools in Alabama and other universities that have been, through Universities Fighting World Hunger, kind of also joining on in that research. So yeah, so kind of looking at all those aspects, both as yeah, another book or two in the future. Really anxious to start traveling again. To speak with people in face-to-face, in person, not via a computer link, and to really tell their stories more. So that, and then kind of the curriculum building, and then continue to speak about this. And again, my favorite audience always students, because it's the inspiration that I derive from there. To see that students are learning is a great thing.
Fantastic. Roger, I don't want to hold you all evening. I think I could probably listen to your stories all evening, but in the
I've got time. It's not like I'm going anywhere, right?
True. I think this is the part one of a 10-part series, and that's what we're going to call it. We're going to call it part one.
Okay.
Thomas, if you have any other questions, let's go ahead and shoot them out. But otherwise, Roger, you answered all my questions, so I can't thank you enough for being here and talking to us about this, because this is a tough topic to talk about, and Thomas and I have done our part to try to set our audience up, but I figured let's drive it home and bring in the expert to talk a little bit more.
Yeah, and the only last thing I would have for you is if there's anything else you feel would be valuable that you want to share with our audience right now, anything that you really want students to hear right now, we'd love to hear it.
Yeah, thank you, and for this opportunity. And kind of the one thing that I try to leave students with is, and again, to your earlier question about, so where do they start, and how do they begin to to influence people next to them and then widen their network. No matter what you study, what your interest is, what your skill set is as you're in high school and already developing that. When you go to college and further your education, even if you start a career or something, after high school, kind of whatever direction life takes you in, whatever your skill set is, whatever your passion is, whatever you're studying, whatever you're working at, there is something for you to do, no matter your specialty or your interest or your skill set, in this issue of finally conquering hunger and malnutrition and food insecurity once and for all, whether it be in your communities, in your neighborhoods, in your county, in your state, or globally. You all have something in you that you can bring to this. And if you as students think about this, you'll find that it's kind of a range of everything. Kind of you go through the course list, the academic possibility list at any university or college, and kind of close your eyes and point your finger at one of them, and there is something that somebody in that discipline can bring to the hunger issue. So that, I think, is what's really important. Kind of if one looks at the pandemic, and the treatment, the cure of COVID. We're depending on, and with the vaccine, we're depending on really smart scientists and lab coats to come up with something for us, right? And praying for it and waiting for them, and please, and the urgency that comes with that. And so we're grateful for that. But in the hunger issue, we don't necessarily have to be people wearing lab coats or have some kind of big scientific degree or something, or all this experience and research. We can start now, and you can have an impact in your own communities and in things around the world, on this now, because it's all these interests and skill sets and passions that you can bring to this. So that's why I love also particularly speaking to students, is that you are at this prime, time in your lives of really building up a specialty and passion and interest in these issues. So thank you for that.
Fantastic. Wise words from Roger. And we thank you for coming on and talking to us, because it means a lot to have somebody that has that voice and has rang the clamor, and somebody that can help us continue to do that.
Thank you so much for taking some time out of your day, spending time talking with us. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate it. And yeah, I'll come back for parts 9 for parts 2 to 10, right?
Looking forward to it.
All right. Thank you.
Conversations surrounding our global food system can be tough. And when we talk about large companies who play a role in the system, the conversation can be even tougher. One way to make things easier is to support conversations like the one we're having. And thanks to Corteva Agriscience, we're able to talk about our food system and help educators have conversations with their students. Corteva is working with producers and consumers to create an agricultural ecosystem that naturally supports people, progress, and the planet. Their goal is to use the latest thinking and technology to grow better food while sustaining the land and conserving resources. Corteva is leading the way in the field by empowering women in agriculture, enabling youth to succeed, and engaging communities to become more vibrant and sustainable. If you want to find out more information about how Corteva is making a difference on farms everywhere by empowering productivity through partnerships, head on over to Corteva.com or connect on social media at Corteva.
All right. Well, I think that just about does it. We heard a lot from Roger. In fact, so much that we couldn't keep it contained into one episode. And I think everybody listening is definitely going to benefit from the wealth of knowledge that Roger brought, rather. And so I just want to review real quick once again what we talked about. So, we went over some definitions for generally what food security means. We talked about, what a calorie is. And we talked about those 4 pillars, right? And so I'll start from backwards, right? Stability, utilization, access, and availability. And really, stability, ironically, is what causes all the other pillars to be stable or not stable. And so that's really that foundational piece. And then we heard from Roger talk a ton about what this actually looks like on that micro level, what it looks like to actually meet somebody that's going through food insecurity, and what that looks like down the road later. And so all these things that we talk about, these hypothetical things, they get real really quick. And I think Roger did a great job bringing that point home. So Thomas, am I missing anything?
Not that I can think of, but be sure to head over to our social media pages at Global Teach Ag. If you want to learn a little bit more about us and what we're up to and all the awesome things that we're working on as the Global Teach Ag Network, you can also head over to Corteva.com to read more about our supporter, Corteva Agriscience. And feel free to look up Mr. Roger Thurow, all his books. They're awesome. They give you a more in-depth look into all the stories that he was talking to us about. And stay tuned for more amazing work that comes from him working with the Chicago Council on Global Affairs and Auburn University.
Fantastic. And, it was a pleasure talking to Roger. It was a pleasure talking to you, Thomas, as always. And from the rest of the team at the Global Teach Ag Network, so long. And remember, think when you eat.